In 1582, aged just 18, Master William Shakespeare of Stratford-upon-Avon married Anne Hathaway from the nearby village of Shottery. She was a slightly older woman than him, and what's more, it was very unusual for a man to get married when still a teenager. Examining the records here in Stratford-upon-Avon, we discover only 3 identifiable men under the age of 21 who got married. Well, one reason Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway got married so soon was that she was already pregnant. He clearly was a passionate young man. The question of Shakespeare's marriage, what it was like and how it influenced his work, is one of the great mysteries of his life. We know that he and Anne remained married all his life, but we also know he spent most of his working life in London, away from her, while she was back in Stratford. There is anecdotal evidence that he was not always faithful to her. But certainly, in those early years, it was clearly a close family. Within a few months of their marriage, a daughter was born, Susanna. And not long after that, twins, a boy and a girl, Hamlet and Judith. Hamlet, named after a friend and neighbour called Hamlet Sadler, was an alternative spelling of Hamlet, which is highly suggestive given the title of Shakespeare's most famous play. It would have been very important to Shakespeare to have had a son. A son meant an heir and the continuation of the family name. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of his life was that young Hamlet died at the age of 11, and he had no further children. The question of how much Shakespeare really loved Anne Hathaway will never be answered. Famously, in his will, he left her his second best bed. Was that the old marital bed, a sign of his affection? Or was he just palming her off with a second-hand bed? Who knows? In a way, what matters is not what the marriage was really like, but how Shakespeare's experience of love and family affected and influenced his plays. Love is, after all, one of his great themes. His tragedies turn on love that goes wrong and ends in catastrophe. His comedies on love that goes right and ends in marriage. There's always been a fascination, though, with the figure of Anne Hathaway and the idea of Shakespeare in love. In March 1818, an artist called Benjamin Robert Haydon, a great lover of Shakespeare's works, wrote to a very close friend of his, a young writer who also had a passion for Shakespeare's work. His name was John Keats, and this is what Benjamin Robert Haydon wrote. "My dear Keats, I shall go mad. In a field at Stratford-upon-Avon that belonged to Shakespeare, they have found a gold ring and seal with the initials W.S. and a true lover's knot between. If this is not Shakespeare, who is it? A true lover's knot. I saw an impression today, and am to have one as soon as possible. As sure as that you breathe and that he was the first of beings, the seal belonged to him." Keats wrote back, hugely excited, though also not quite sure. "My dear Haydon, in sooth, I hope you are not too sanguine about that seal. In sooth, I hope it is not Brummagem. In double sooth, I hope it is his, and in triple sooth, I hope I shall have an impression." By Brummagem or Brummagem, Keats meant made in Birmingham, which at that time was a byword for a counterfeit, a fake. Here is the ring. It's now one of the prized possessions of the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. It's a heavy gold ring, and it does have the initials W.S. and a knot design in between. The initials are in mirror image because this is a seal ring. You would press it down on a piece of wax to seal a letter. Well, of course, we can't know for sure that this W.S. was Shakespeare himself, and we can't really know whether the figure was a lover's knot, denoting his passion for Anne Hathaway. All we can say for sure is that this object is a sign of the cult of Shakespeare, the passion that later writers and artists and theatregoers and readers have had for Shakespeare, a sign of our desire to know more about his life, his work, and his world.